Hi everyone, this is Dr. Schroeder with this week's video introduction to week number 6 of our course in evidence-based practice. And I hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving week. It was kind of nice having Thanksgiving come at the time and we didn't have to be in class participating in the discussion questions. So that made it for a little bit of a, not so much of a vacation or not so much of a week off really, because you've been working on your evidence-based practice papers. However, it is kind of nice having to be or not having to worry about getting in and checking into class 3 times a week and having to do the discussion question responses. So I hope everybody had a great week off of discussion, and we'll be back into it again this week. The focus of the discussion question this week is going to be on the implementation phase of the evidence-based practice process. And this is very important. This is probably the most underappreciated or underestimated part of the plan. It's great to come up with a great intervention, great ideas, great plans, but if you don't have a plan for actually implementing and seeing the implementation through to fruition, it is very frustrating. It tends to bring morale down, and it just gets into a place where people just never really get any real change done. The changes that they would like to do, it just never really comes to pass because they don't really have an adequate plan for it. So that's going to be the focus of the discussion this week. You're going to develop this thing called a SMART goal, and SMART is just an acronym that refers to specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, or with the time frame. Now, important to realize, the SMART goal here is not the same thing as your PICO. Your SMART is not addressing the problem that your PICO addresses. What your SMART goal does is it addresses the plan that you're going to have to implement your intervention in your PICO question. So when you're talking about specific and measurable, we're referring to, for example, what training does your staff or will your staff require before this new intervention is put into place? What new processes or paperwork or tracking needs to be developed? For many of you have identified interventions that are going to be measured through the use of a tool or a questionnaire. Well, who's going to develop that? Who's going to come up with those questions? Who's going to research and come up with the best one? And how are staff going to be trained in its use? So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. This is going to be reflected both here in your discussion question and also in your evidence-based practice part 2 paper, particularly in that first table that is listed where it says your implementation plan. The information from the discussion question is going to be essentially plugged into or used to complete the table in that part of the paper. And we're also going to be discussing, part of the discussion question is talking about what are some of the organizational challenges. What are some things that a nurse leader can do to help to prepare an organization or prepare a unit for change? Change is difficult, and even though we come up with great evidence-based practice interventions, they have to be implemented, and we have to get staff buy-in. If you don't, they tend to be a setup for failure. So that's why this is such an important part of the evidence-based practice process, this implementation piece. Also due this week is your evidence-based practice part 2 paper that I've given you some feedback or given you some guidelines in the announcement last week, and I've answered a few questions on it. Well, I do apologize for the one piece of confusion where it says in the template to include your table, what is referred to both as your Appendix G in the John Hopkins book and the table of evidence, that I want you to start the paper with that. I prefer that you do that because it really just makes more logical sense. It's where you ended your last paper, it's where this one should actually start. It's almost like these 2 papers would be combined into one long paper. You did your introduction in the first paper, you really didn't have to write a conclusion, and at this particular paper you don't have to start with an introduction, because really you're just flowing from the same idea that you had from your evidence-based practice part 1 paper. So it's really kind of a continuation of the same process. And you're going to identify your implementation plan, referring back to these SMART goals, and you're identifying who's going to be responsible for the implementation, and then evaluating your outcomes. Your outcomes evaluation does refer right back to your PICO. Remember, when we talk about your the outcomes for an implementation, the outcomes would be something along the lines of 100% will be trained in the use of a whatever your intervention is going to be within a 6-month period. That would be a very very general one that would apply to many of you. Many of you, it's going to need to be more specific than that, but it's not going to actually. The implementation plan doesn't relate to the PICO directly. In the evaluation plan, though, you go right to the outcomes. What is it that you said that you were going to evaluate? How are you going to measure your implementation to see if it was effective? That's what's going to be in that second table where it talks about your evaluation plan. Who's going to measure the results? How are they going to be reported? What are your results? What do you expect your results to be? That's what that second table in the table template is for. And of course, then you're going to identify your resources and discuss what it's going to cost for you to implement this plan. So of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or feel free to post them. I'm here to answer them for you. But this is really the last piece of heavy lifting for the class. And so this is your last big deliverable, the last big graded item in the class. So I'm here to help you. Anything I can do to answer questions or make the process seem easier to understand, please feel free to let me know. I hope everybody has a great week, and I look forward to seeing you in discussion forums.